take me dancing naked in the, sing it, it's hot, it's fucking New Pow, look, it's hot. They lived in the East Village in New York when they went to Columbia University, and they would have spaghetti Saturdays to feed all the starving musicians, and people like Charlie Bird Parker would come to their house because they were starving. The gig of the century, basically, it was roughly 300 to 350,000 people. And something in me said, yeah, you're home. This is what you're meant to do. I really like your voice, man. I'd like to make you a star. Then Elton. And my mind was blown forever. And he just came out and said, I just wondered how a person such as yourself would have a car like this. When you talk about carving a path or, leading the way and taking the blows head on so that we could succeed, my parents were the epitome of that.
Your beauty comes not just from the fact that you are a beautiful woman, but it's like this inner strength has always been there. And you were always, to me, an incredibly powerful woman. Oh. And it's about 30 years ago.
Yes.
And you look amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. You know what it is, Steve? I sleep with men who are much younger than myself. And I suck off their life force. I'm really serious. I think that has a lot to do with it. No, actually, to be honest with you, first and foremost, I have to thank my parents because I have amazing genes. I mean, my mother in her 70s looked like she was in her 40s, and my father as well. So there's that. And then I've just been on an amazing health journey because I discovered in February that I had kind of tipped over into diabetic range. And no, she's not having that, okay? So I, as of this morning, have lost 40 pounds.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Yeah. And
can we talk about your parents, actually? Because one of the things that really interests me about people is their drive. Successful people have lots of drives, and often it comes from something in their childhood, something in their past. Have you ever analyzed where you get your drive from, and was it from your parents in some way?
Definitely from my parents. I believe that some people, it can go one of two ways. Some people become driven because their parents are constantly telling them that they're not good enough and that they're a failure and they'll never amount to anything. So, 6-year-old little Johnny says, well, I'm going to show you. Or says, well, daddy's not going to love me unless I'm a success. And so they become driven from that type of motivation. Then there's the kind of motivation that I and my siblings had, which is my parents, my mother in particular, said to us that we were infinitely loved. They would love us forever and that we could achieve anything. Because you have to remember that my parents grew up in the Jim Crow era in the United States. I mean, they were born in the 1920s. And they both went on to go to medical school. And my mother, in fact, was the first woman of any race to do graduate studies in medicine at UCLA, my alma mater. So they really, when you talk about carving a path or, leading the way and taking the blows head on so that we could succeed, my parents were the epitome of that. And so because they had achieved what they achieved, they told us that we could achieve whatever we chose. And with that unbelievable support, it really lent itself to my self-confidence because I knew I was loved. And, when my mother died, the day, like 2 days before she died, we had the kind of conversation that every child wants to have with their parent, where any slights or anything were forgiven. And we expressed our undying love for one another. And I knew after that conversation that that was the last time I would speak to her.
Oh, wow. I find that really fascinating because I actually had a similar conversation with my mother 2 days before she died. And my mother told me, I think I'd looked to my mother for years for confirmation of me as a gay man,
Yes.
and all these things. And 2 days before she died, she said to me, "I hope you meet a man who is as kind to you as you have been to me." And she went through all these things that she wanted in my life, and it fundamentally changed my life. And that's only 3 years ago. It fundamentally changed her life. So I understand the power of that moment.
Yeah.
Was that a fundamental change for you?
That conversation, no, except for the fact that I find a lot of people live out their adult lives incomplete, because I think a lot of our issues come from a lack of completion with our childhood issues, which usually stem from our parents. So unless you feel complete with your parents, you will not be complete as an adult. And oh, by the way, you were complimenting me. You look lovely too. You look fabulous. You did all your hair and everything. You look so cute.
I also sleep with younger men.
Yes, darling. Yeah. Doesn't it work? Seriously, I'm so not kidding. Their force is just kind of delicious and makes the
I
skin.
just want to talk about your parents a bit more, because you were talking, obviously, you know, the Jim Crow era, the era that they were that they grew up in, and the era that they had to make an impact on the world.
Yes.
I mean, they were completely aware of what was going on at that time, obviously. But as a child, when did you become aware in terms of what they were going through? Because, you know, that's quite a heavy thing for a child to witness.
It wasn't until I was much older, because they really made an effort to shield us from that. Again, my mother in particular. My parents divorced when I was 2.5. So I was very close with my father, and he was very much present in our lives. But the person I saw every day was my mother. And this is this career woman, you know, cardiologist, who was a very, very powerful individual. You would have loved my mother. And not only was she a genius, a literal genius, she was very loving and magnanimous, and she never forgot where she came from. So she would have all these celebrity clients because she switched her medical practice into holistic medicine and preventive health care in the 1970s, way before it was really fashionable. But she still had all of her, we have an insurance here called Medi-Cal, which is, you know, basically government paid insurance. And so she had a lot of poor patients that were still on Medi-Cal, a lot of really exclusive, you know, like Hollywood doctors would never dream of taking Medi-Cal, and she still took it so that she could still bring these cutting edge modalities to the community that she came from. And I never forgot that. And she would be at the office until 8, sometimes 9 o'clock at night, seeing these people that had taken the bus for 2 hours to get to the office to see her. And she still had made time for us. She was a fabulous mother, you know. So she grew up so hard that she didn't want us to experience that growing up. So I grew up like a little rich white girl, basically. I grew up in Bel Air and Malibu, which are the exclusive neighborhoods in Los Angeles. I had a Porsche for my first car before I even had a proper driver's license. I only had a learner's permit. When I was 15 and a half, she bought me a Porsche. So that's how I grew up. But my father was the one who really wanted us to know more about our African heritage and more about civil rights. And I mean, my father marched with Dr. King. My father debated Malcolm X, taking Dr. King's viewpoint. He ran for city council. So it wasn't really until I got into my 20s that I started to really understand racism in America, because I was shielded from it. I grew up surrounded by wealth.
What was that moment like? I mean, what happened to you that made you really aware? Was there a moment?
Well, there was one in particular. I mean, because the kids we grew up with were fairly accepting. So I mean, I know watching on television, there was a show called Julia that starred Diane Carroll, the late great, who was actually a patient of my father's. My father was a clinical psychologist, so I used to play with her little bitch daughter who I couldn't stand, spoiled little brat. Anyway, so seeing her on television as the lead and a professional and not a domestic in a television series was a big deal, especially because my mother was a doctor. So, but I only had that one role model. All the rest were white. But this doesn't register when you're growing up. It just is what's normal. You get used to not seeing yourself represented. But I remember going to New York once when I was in my 20s, and there was a huge storm in Colorado. So my flight that was going via Denver got canceled, and I was routed through Houston, Texas. And I got on that flight, and I got to Houston, and there was someone at the gate telling everyone where to go to catch their connecting flight. And the person there told me a gate that was way on the other side of the airport. And if you know Houston Airport, it's enormous. It's like a city. And so by the time I got there and realized that the gate I was meant to go to was 2 gates over from where I just landed, by the time I got back there, my flight had left. And so I was full of righteous indignation and rage. And I went to the counter and I said, your employee gave me the wrong gate and caused me to miss this flight. You will be putting me in a hotel tonight and blah, blah, blah. And this person, I could just see it. I can speak the better part of 4 languages. I've been to, at this point in my life, about 48 countries. They just looked me up and down and just saw another N-word. And they said, well, everyone else seems to have made their flights. And they didn't do anything. And it was at that moment I realized exactly what it felt like to be treated like an N-word.
How did that make you feel?
Horrible, obviously. Completely powerless. And just, I felt, what's the word I'm looking for? Impotent. And, you know, you get this flush of rage in your face, and you know that there's nothing you can say that's going to change the situation. So you just tuck your tail between your legs and go away and, you know, live to fight another day. I've also, before that, when I was 16, when my sister was 16 and she was 16, I was 11. My mother had gotten a new Mercedes, and so she gave her old one to my sister, who was 16, and it was a powder blue 450 SL. And we lived on the beach in Malibu. And so we were driving home, and I was my sister was driving, I was in the passenger seat, and this California Highway Patrolman pulled us over and said, she asked him, what did I do, officer, that had you pulled me over? I wasn't speeding. And he just came out and said, I just wondered how a person such as yourself would have a car like this. And I remember, us showing him everything, and he realized there was nothing he could bust us for. So he took off, and we just looked at each other and we started crying because it was humiliating. It was humiliating because we knew, especially in that area, we had lots of white friends who drove nice cars, and they never had that happen to them.
I mean, it's terrible to think that that is a long time ago, and, very little in many ways has changed.
Yes.
So I know you as someone who's also a political activist, who's someone who's very interested in politics and very open and will speak their mind, which I think is an incredibly important thing in this world.
Yes.
How does that feel when you look back at an event like that and know that that could happen today or tomorrow, and not much has really changed?
Honey, why do you think I moved to Italy? I was one of those people, a lot of people said, oh, well, if Trump gets elected, I'm going to leave. Well, I did. I actually did it once before when I moved to the UK. I moved to the UK during the Bush years. And I put my money where my mouth is. I will not live in a country where the leading administration is blatantly racist. I will not do it. Now, Italy has its own issues with racism. The whole EU does, but generally, I don't receive as much as if I had been an African refugee, because I'm not. I'm an American. That does make a difference, believe it or not, which is sad. But I am all day on Facebook talking to people, and it seems a bit like Don Quixote in some respects, until you look and I get private messages from people saying, I had no idea things were the way they are for people of color in this country until I started following you. I had no idea. And then I see attitudes that I just kind of ignored when people blatantly throw it in your face and you come back at them. I understand what you face. And thank you for opening my eyes. I thought I was an ally, but I really wasn't. And I didn't know that until I saw you shutting these racists down who infest your page.
I would think that's really fascinating, because in the 80s, and I talked to Lee John from Imagination about this, I had a black boyfriend, used to go to a nightclub, and to get a taxi, I would have to go out and wait on the street for the taxi to stop, because if we stood together or him alone, they wouldn't stop. And that was my awakening, in a sense, because I'd never encountered it, because there I was encountering it through someone else. So it was the first time. And that for me was an incredible shock. And I thought, at that time, Christ, it's bad enough being gay in that era.
Yes.
It was, much worse if being black, because you are instantly recognizable as that. Whereas if you're gay, you're not instantly recognizable as being gay.
Yes, exactly. And that's something that I also find very fascinating, but not so much fascinating as infuriating, is the racism within the LGBTQ community. I mean, seriously? Really, bitch? You're gonna look down on your gay black brethren because they're black? Seriously? And you're being marginalized already? I find it and then you have gays looking down on the trans community, and I have a lot of trans friends. So, and I'm the kind, I will step to somebody in defense of my friends. So I'm doing that all the time too. I cannot understand this compartmentalization. And I just watched, oh my God, the death and life of Marsha P. Johnson, who, was the pivotal figure in the Stonewall riots, and how much she and her friend went through in terms of discrimination from the gay community for being trans. I mean, when are we going to get it? Yeah. I don't.
You mentioned earlier about Diane Carroll and having a figure who is a mirror to you, in a sense. You know what I mean? You see someone on television who's African American, and you have then a sort of representation, finally. You know what I mean? During the 60s was Motown. In the 70s, we had Stax. There were lots of African American artists who were coming through during that period. What music did your parents listen to, and what music did you tend towards?
Well, that's interesting, because it seems, yes, it was coming more to the fore than ever before, but it was very compartmentalized, which is part of the reason that you and I know each other, because I had to move to the UK to do the kind of music that I wanted to do. Because if you were in the US, if you didn't do R&B or soul music, they didn't want to know. That's all we were allowed to do. When you had, unless you were considered like an exotic import, such as Jimi Hendrix broke in the UK before he came back to the US. Donna Summer broke in Germany before she came back and broke in the US. And that was my ultimate plan, was to break in the UK and then come back to the US. So growing up, though, I listened to what my sister listened to, and we listened to what our friends listened to. Now, our parents grew up or were first married and they lived in the East Village in New York. when they went to Columbia University, and they would have spaghetti Saturdays to feed all the starving musicians. And people like Charlie Bird Parker would come to their house because they were starving, and they would feed them. So my father was very, very into jazz. And we would listen to a lot of jazz when we were driving in the car, and Duke Ellington and people like that. My mother listened to a lot of contemporary pop, if you believe that. She loved Elton John. And in fact, my first concert ever was Elton John, the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road tour. And we went to the Forum, all very naive, not realizing it had been sold out for weeks. So we were at the Los Angeles Forum, and it's a round building. So we walked around and around and around during the first act, which was Kiki D, and trying to find tickets, and we couldn't find any. And so finally, this big VIP group was going in when they were changing from Kiki D's set to Elton's. And they were going in the VIP entrance, and this poor security guard had seen this woman and her child. I was 11 or 12. Walking around, and he said, quick, sneak in with them. I won't tell anyone. And he let us in, and we found, the entryways that go into the stadium, kind of come up like this, and there's a little rooftop over where the stairs go up. And sitting on one of these were two fold-out chairs. So we were like, quick, and we sat down just as the lights went down. And the dry ice started streaming off the edge of the stage. And the opening refrain of A Funeral for a Friend, started, and then Elton. And my mind was blown forever. And I actually got to tell him that, which was really nice, that he had a huge impact on me musically, and that I wound up making it my career. And I thanked him for it.
How many sisters were there at home? How many sisters do you have?
Well, that's a long story. My father was quite prolific. He had 3 wives and 7 children. So his first wife, he had two girls, my older sisters, Marcia and Dana. And he encouraged all of us not to think about halves or anything. We're just sisters and brothers. So my 2 older sisters, Marcia and Dana, were quite the figures in and role models for us as well in entertainment, in that my sister Marcia was one of the first major Black models. She came up with Grace Jones and Beverly Johnson in the 70s. And so she was on the cover of Essence magazine, things like that. She also was in the iconic Russ Meyer's classic Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And I was on that set when I was 6 years old at the party scene, which is kind of like, why are you bringing this child on? Anyway, explains a lot about me. And then my sister Dana is a professor of dance. Well, both of them were dancers. They danced Naida at the Met with Katherine Dunham and things like that. But Dana went on to become a professor of dance and worked with the Dance Theater of Harlem. She's also a very accomplished songwriter, and she wrote most of Pull Up to the Bumper for Grace Jones. She's also an actress and a director. So then my sister Lorelei, who is my one full sister with my mom and dad, she has toured with the Rolling Stones and toured with Pink Floyd with me for a short period of time, and toured with Rod Stewart and has worked with the Australian Pink Floyd now for the last 10 years. Then there's me. I'm right in the middle. Then my little sister Laura was a teacher, and she's also a very talented songwriter, but she didn't like the business. She could have broken in the 80s and just didn't like it. So she went on to become a teacher and has 4 beautiful children, 2 of whom are award-winning artists. One was presented with an award by the White House. Then my little brother John is in the JAG Corps in the Navy, and he's stationed in Japan. And then my youngest brother James has also been in the National Guard and done 4 tours of Iraq, and I think he went to Afghanistan, and has 2 beautiful children.
That's quite a bereavement. That's incredible. I think, the Elton John story about going there and experiencing something that's so powerful and has an impact on you. Do you believe that was the moment that opened your eyes to saying, I want to be on stage, I want to be a singer, I want to be part of this? Or did that come later?
Well, that was a big part of it, because I had initially wanted to follow in my parents' footsteps and go into medicine. I mean, by the time I was 9, I had decided I was going to go to Stanford. I was going to be an OBGYN, and I was going to practice the Le Boyer method of child birthing. I was a prolific reader from the age of about 2.5. My sister started teaching me how to read. And by the time I finished elementary school, I'd read 95% of the school library. And in fact, I got the highest score in the history of my elementary school in the IQ tests. But then it was also a very artist-based school. So we would have, every Friday we'd have what they called sings, where we would learn a song in music class and we'd sing, and acting productions and things like that. And I always really loved it. And I was cast by some friends in a production. They were art students at CalArts, which is an art college here, a university. And they were doing a production in the early days of video, when the videotapes were about this big. And they cast me as Alice in Alice in Wonderland. And so that's really when I started getting into acting. And then I saw Elton. I was also a huge, huge Joni Mitchell fan. She influenced me probably more than almost any other artist musically.
Why?
Her lyrics are, for someone who loves the written word, when I look at the way that she describes things, the paintings that she creates with words, the imagery, it always pushed me when I started writing things to say, well, that's a bit mundane. What would Joni say? How would Joni describe this? Sting is another one who does that for me lyrically. Prince also, just all around, huge influence. But anyway, to finally get to where I decided I wanted to be an artist, you know who influenced me on that? And I didn't tell her when I met her, and I'm really mad. I said something else really stupid. But Jane Fonda.
Oh, wow.
One day when I was at home, and I'd been bitten by the bug. I was definitely into acting. I had started also working part-time in my mother's medical practice at her office, and started to realize that my fantasies against the reality of working as a doctor, it's not fun. It's really hard work, and sick people are really difficult to be around a lot of the time, because they don't feel good. So they snap at you, and they just, it's very rewarding when you save someone's life and things like that. But I was kind of weighing it out, and the day-to-day grind of filing and, working with patients and all that stuff. Then one day Jane was on a talk show, and she said, don't get into acting because you want to. Get into this career because you have to, because something feels missing, like there's a hole in your soul if you're not creating your art. Get into it because you must. And I realized that that's who I was. And I knew then that I had to go into, I was an actress before I was a singer.
So what did you say to her when you met her that wasn't the right thing?
Oh, well, I was there with my husband at the time. And I said to her, I thanked her for being a huge impact on my sexuality, in that the first thing I saw her in was Barbarella. And it was so freeing to see that it had a big impact on me in that part of my life. And she kind of looked a little flustered and giggled, because that's true. It really did have a big impact on my sexuality, because she was so free, and it was so matter of fact, and wasn't, you have to realize, I'm 58. I'll be 59 this year. And back then it was just the beginnings of the era of free love, and people were still fighting the shame and the puritanical attitudes towards sex that people have in this country. And Barbarella was shocking when it came out. And I remember thinking, ooh, you're a little kid, so it's kind of like, I'm not supposed to see this. And then when I saw it, I thought to myself, this is how it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to be apologetic about sex. It's supposed to be pleasurable, and there's no shame in that.
What vision did you have for yourself as an artist in those early days? What vision, what did you say to yourself, this is what I want to be, this is what I'm going to go for?
Well, when I first started at UCLA as a theater arts major, of course I wanted to do the classics. And I wanted to play Blanche Dubois. Oh, all young actresses want to play Blanche. But unfortunately, at that time, I was 18. What the hell did I know about the kind of pain that Blanche had been through that made her who she was? I could play the hell out of that part now, let me tell you. But I wanted to see, that was the other thing that was a rude awakening for me, is I wanted to play all the great roles, but they didn't cast Black actresses in those roles. And in fact, I left UCLA because I started noticing a trend. I was cast every quarter, which is good. Meant the professors liked me, but I played a maid. I played a voice where you never saw me. I played Tituba the slave in The Crucible. See where I'm going with this? And then I, of course, had fallen in love with the bard. When you're a young, impressionable actor, you fall in love with Shakespeare. And so I was taking a Shakespeare class, and my professor was amazing. And so a main stage production came up, and I auditioned. And Professor Hackett, I loathe this creature to this day. Oh, you're so amazing. You must be so familiar with this material. Oh, it's amazing. And I was like, wow, he really liked my performance. And he called me back, and then I got to final callbacks, and every time he just gushed about my performance and how comfortable I seemed to feel with the language. And I was all excited. And when they put up the cast list, I was not cast so much as a walk-on in the crowd scenes, and I was devastated. So I set a meeting with him in his office, and I said, why did you gush over my auditions and you didn't cast me? And he said, well, you're so striking, and a director must think of these things. You draw the eye. And I'm thinking, well, isn't that kind of what you want for your leading lady? And then he went on to say, and I was considering you for the part of the courtesan, which is the whore. And it hit me. He was not going to cast a Black actress in a main stage Shakespeare production. And I was livid. I was furious. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to put up with this kind of racism in casting, and my mother is paying them thousands of dollars for me to go there every year, why don't I put up with this kind of racism in casting where they're paying me? So I dropped out. And 6 months later, I was cast in Flashdance.
What was your role in Flashdance?
I played Heels, a stripper. And that was the other thing. So I started playing, I started acting professionally, and I played Heels, a stripper. And I played Willow, the head of the Black prison faction, in this horrible movie called Vendetta. And then I played a hooker opposite Gary Sinise on a television show called Hunter. Same kind of thing, very racist casting. And then I wound up getting into music accidentally. And what stood against me as an actor was all in my favor as a singer, because everyone wanted the big Black backing vocalist. And my first tour ever was Pink Floyd.
So when you say accidentally, how did that come about?
Well, my sister Lorelei was signed to Capitol Records, and another friend of our older siblings was Nile Rodgers. They grew up in the same building. And so Nile was producing the album, and I'd flown out to New York to sing on her album. And at that time, the Momentary Lapse Reason tour had started. You know, David and Nick and Richard Wright had come out and had a lot to prove. And they only had 2 singers at the time. And David wanted to do some live concert videos, and as he put it, add some color. So he wanted to round it out with 3 more Black singers. So he asked Michael Pilo, who ran the production company shooting the videos, if he knew any Black singers, and Michael was friends with Lorelei. So he recommended Lorelei, and because I happened to be there, she recommended me. And another friend of ours, Roberta Freeman, who I just spoke to this morning. And we sent in photographs and some tapes of us singing, and they said, right, you sound great, come down. And I knew, I was a fan of Pink Floyd. I loved Dark Side of the Moon, but I didn't know what any of them looked like, because they made a point of not putting their pictures on their albums. And so we're sitting backstage, and here comes this man with an acoustic guitar, and he goes, hello, I'm David. Shall we go with some parts? And I'm like, who is this? I don't really. And then I heard him sing, and I was like, oh. And then we went over some of the harder parts, and we were meant to watch the first show and then jump in on the subsequent shows to film. And he said, well, you sound great. Would you like to have a go tonight? And we said, yes, because what are we going to say? I'm not ready. No, of course not. So we did the gig, and I walked out in front of 15,000 people. I'd never sung in front of more than 400 before that. And something in me said, yeah, you're home. This is what you're meant to do. And they subsequently asked me to join the tour. And I stayed with through the last show in 1995 or 4, whichever one it was.
You said they had something to prove. Dave Gilmour particularly had something to prove because of the incarnations of Pink Floyd, and also because of the history of the music. And was there a sense of nerves about that tour that you could feel? I mean, he's an incredibly calm man. I've interviewed him, and he's very laid back and centered, and you don't feel any emotion that could be dangerous in any way. Do you know what I mean?
You would never know it. I didn't find out until much later. I was a child, I was in my 20s. So I was thrust into this giant, this behemoth of a world tour. It was the biggest tour, I think, of that year. And they battled it out for first place with the Stones on, subsequent tours. So I was clueless. I had no idea what was at stake there, because this was their first album and tour after they split with Roger. I didn't really know the history, a lot of it. I was a fan, but I wasn't a fanatic. Like some of the fans, some people love to send me pictures and send me this obscure these things. And David was playing this guitar with this gauge of strings on this amp, and I don't give a shit. I'm not that kind of a fan. I worked with the band. I don't need to know the minutia, but a lot of people love that stuff. So I didn't even know that much about what had happened between them until I was in the band. And then I was like, oh, and it was really harsh. I felt bad for Roger, actually, because he had a tour out. The Radio Chaos tour was out when we were doing the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour. So we were in full Spinal Tap fashion playing the Enormo Dome in town, and he'd have a little 5,000 seat arena that he was having difficulty selling out because we were selling out everything.
What did you learn from them?
Everything.
Okay, what's everything?
It was the best musical finishing school I could possibly have gone to. To start at the top like that, really, I learned how to hear myself, how to make sure that I can hear myself, what a good balance sounds like, to insist on perfection. And in fact, when I started, Rachel Fury and Machan Taylor were already in the band, and they did not gel well in many respects. And they were kind of jockeying for power position in different ways that I'm not going to go into. But let's just say they would take it out on stage. And so they would try to outsing one another. And they both had very high, very cutting, somewhat shrill tone. And Steve O'Rourke, God bless his soul, the band manager, he came to me and said, look, sort out this section or you're all fired. And I'm like, what, me? I'm the new girl. I don't fucking, all right. And I went to the girls and I was like, you fucking bitches, you need to stop this shit on stage or I'll kick your ass to start blending or I'm not having it. I'm not fired behind your bullshit. And we started to blend. And I'm the one they kept for all of the tours after that.
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm probably going to jump a bit here, but in terms of, when did you meet Youth? How did that come about? Was that then coming to Europe?
It's not a jump at all, actually. When we did Pink Floyd live in Venice, that amazing spectacle. Wait.
Is that him on the phone?
No. Sorry. I met him at that gig because it was, the gig of the century, basically. It was roughly 300 to 350,000 people turned up, which they weren't expecting. And he came, and he came to me after the show, and he said, I really like your voice, man. I'd like to make you a star. And I said, okay. And the first song we wrote together was Naked in the Rain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was meant to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So where were you at that time?
I was living in London.
Okay. I mean,
Or was I? I can't remember if I was or not. I don't know if I'd moved to London yet or not. I might have. Either that or I was living in Los Angeles and then I moved to London.
I mean, that song, I mean, it was the whole album, but the song was a massive, massive hit. It was a #1 dance hit in America, I believe. But I know it was like top of the charts in Britain and around Europe. Okay. But it was really up there, played to death on MTV at that time. And it was an absolutely phenomenal success. I don't think I was the only person responsible. I was the one who interviewed people. But yeah, I mean, I loved it. So that's it. That must have changed your life. That must have been a moment where you had a different energy and movement in your life. What happened?
Well, the song came out, and I'm pretty oblivious for the most part of my impact on people because I'm just me. I'm not particularly pretentious. I can be when I want to be, but for the most part, I don't. People see me, and I've had people come up and start crying when they met me, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? Stop it. But it really hit me one day when I was shopping in the King's Road, and I was walking, looking at shoes, and I saw these beautiful boots in the window, and it was a basement shop. So I went downstairs to go ask how much the boots in the window upstairs were. And as I entered the shop, Naked in the Rain came on the radio. And the shop girl, was it a girl or a guy? I think it was a guy, actually. So I was like, oh, I just wanted to ask you about those boots. And he looked at the radio and looked at me and looked at the radio and looked at me. And you could see the wheels turning and, like that meme with all the math. It was really quite funny. And I was very amused. But then I think, I don't know if it was that same day or another time, there were 3 or 4 girls who saw me shopping and they started following me in and out of shops, singing at me. Take me dancing naked in the, sing it, it's hot, it's fucking new power, look, it's hot, sing it. And that was kind of annoying. But I was mostly pretty lucky. I haven't really been inundated by a lot of people. I guess a lot of people also don't realize that I can be somewhat imposing. I mean, I stand in flat feet at 5'10". So when I've got 5-inch heels on, I'm 6'3". So I'm a big bitch.
I mean, you mentioned about people's reaction to you. Do you think it changed you in any way? Did it give you anything? Did it take
No,
anything from your life?
no, no. See, and that goes back again to what we were talking about earlier about the foundation that my parents built for me. I did not seek this out to fill some void in my soul. I did not seek this out to find a validation that I felt was missing. I like me. I'm very comfortable in my own skin. So if anything, it's kind of an annoyance because it gets in the way of just being. But I'm in fact, I'll tell you, just, during the pandemic, I was driving down Sunset Boulevard here in Los Angeles, and Sweetest Taboo by Sade came on the radio. And I was transported immediately back to summer of 2019 with my sister. I've blagged this gig, my favorite gig, at this spa called the Terme Preistoriche, which is just outside of Venice in the countryside in Italy. And it's this beautiful spa hotel. And they do this Jazz by the Pool summer series. And so they'll give me like 5 nights in the hotel, and then we do 1 night show, and still get paid a little bit, but it's basically like a paid vacation. And it's one of my favorite gigs because they have this fabulous buffet of Italian food, and they set up all the tables by the pools, these beautiful thermal pools that they have there. And we do this great jazz gig. And in 2019, I did that with my sister, and we loved singing together, and the band was amazing. And I added that song to the set, and I sang it with a slightly more jazz arrangement, and I was playing shaker. And it was one of those moments as a musician where you're not even looking at the audience. They didn't even need to be there. But when the song is coming off better than rehearsal, and everything just falls into place, and you all look around at each other, everyone playing, and you got this big grin on your face because you're like, we're in the pocket. This is the shit. We are making this song sing alive. This song is alive in this moment because of what we're doing. And you're just flushed with this joy of creating music. And I went to open my mouth to sing along when I was driving down the street, and I burst into tears because I realized how much I missed that. The pandemic hit musicians harder than just about anyone. I mean, people were getting exemptions to go to church and silliness, but music, no. Live music, nope.
Now, one of the highlights of your life must have been coming to my birthday party.
I was going to say, I wish we could do that again.
Well, actually, we may be doing it again because I talked to our mutual friend Manos, and he's thinking about it. But it's going to be, I don't know whether it'd be on crutches by then, but we're definitely going to do it again. So maybe, what do you remember? I can't even remember what year. I think it was like 92, 93.
Well, it was your 33 and a third birthday.
So 92, 93. Yeah, I was 92.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and I've got sort of vague, because I had one when I was 33 and one when I was 34, and I've sort of mashed them all together, and I'm not really sure. But I've had this image of you running, which I put in slow motion on MTV, at the Olympic Stadium.
Yes.
In Greece. Yes.
Do you have I would love to see that footage.
Oh no, I'm going to dig that out and send it to you because it's. I will find it. It's really, really funny. I think it's somewhere online.
What I remember that running in the Olympic Stadium, the original Olympic Stadium. I remember seeing the guardsmen in their uniforms. I remember eating fabulous food. I remember, then the party itself. I remember riding into the venue on the back of a Harley with the local Hells Angels set. I remember, of course, Kim Mazel being so fabulous. And was Nina at that party? Nina Hagen? Or was that a different time?
Well, I think you came to both, didn't you? Both years.
Yes,
so
yes.
Nina was the following year, really. There was Nina Adamski. So
was
the DJ.
Adamski was the one with Kim. I remember because it was Nina.
No,
me and Kim Mazel and Adamski and that really tall blonde woman, Nordic.
Rebecca DeRuvo? No, a presenter.
No. She was a singer.
Oh, La Camilla. But she got
Yes,
blonde.
like
She got
Camilla,
blonde. Oh my God, yeah, La Camilla.
devoured Adamski. I remember that. Yeah. Oh, that was wild. And I remember actually. How much detail do you want?
Well, he was on crutches, so we don't want to go there, really.
No, not with that. No, it was what went on that night. Because I remember,
Oh.
remember that girl that was walking around going, "Open your mouth," and she was like the Holy Sacrament.
I lived with these people.
That
was insane.
All I remember, I remember this. I remember coming up on some of the best ecstasy I've ever had in my life. And sometimes when I'm like out of it like that, my mind opens to another place, and I am quite psychic, believe it or not. And I remember being rolling like mad, standing out in the front. The sun was coming up. We were waiting for the taxis to go back to the hotel. And this man was standing next to me, and this thing just came through me, and I grabbed his arm and I said, "What are you doing? What the fuck are you doing?" And he like looked afraid, and I was like, "You have a son. You have a child. Your son needs you, and you're fucking around being an asshole. What's the matter with you? You need to grow up and get your shit together for your son. He needs you." And he's like, huh. He burst into tears. He started crying. He's like, "How do you know this? I don't believe it's true. You're right. I do." And I read the man. I gave him a psychic reading while I was on ecstasy, waiting for a taxi. And then I looked down, and his knuckles were like scraped up like he'd been fighting. And obviously he was like, I told him, like, "You're on the edge of going to a really bad place, and you need to switch gears and go the other way because your son needs you."
Well, I remember at the end of the evening, I met this guy called Christian, and I ended up taking him back to the hotel. I got into bed with him, and I'd forgot that I was sharing a room with my best friend, Anna, and she woke up and just said, "Oh my God, I hope you're not going to do it in front of me." The next minute, the phone rang, and it was, I think she was called June or Jane, who was like the person looking after Kim. And she said, "Kim's about to jump out the window." And I said, "Okay, see you in the morning." So it was a very bizarre
We were
end to a few days, but brilliant. Oh, to be young again. So as I said, we have to do that again. We really have to do that again.
That was one of the best parties I've ever been to in my life, bar none.
How do you look back on those years in relation to today? Do you look back with nostalgia, or just with like, that was fun, but I'm this person today, because we all change and develop in life, and I'm this person today, and I'm comfortable and happy and everything with what I do?
There's definitely a great deal of nostalgia, because that was the day. Back then I could walk in, do a 20-minute set, boom, $5,000, 5,000 pounds, boom. Yeah, I missed that. That was great. And it was just, but I still do that. Not quite for that much money at the moment, but I still do that a lot. I still travel all over the world singing. It is a little different now, but I'm doing more things now. I mean, my sister and I, Lorelai and I, put out Black Floyd, an album of some Pink Floyd covers sung from the perspective of Black women, as well as some originals. There's a song I wrote with John Caron, who I toured with Floyd with, who works now with Roger Waters, and one song I wrote with Guy Pratt, who now tours with Nick Mason, and a song Lorelai wrote with Lemmy Kilmister, believe it or not. I'm in better voice now than I've ever been in my life. So in that respect, I'm very happy where I'm at. Plus, like I said, I just lost 40 pounds. So I'm starting to look like me again. I was getting kind of like Big Mama's house there for a minute, and I was not enjoying it. So I changed it. I look forward to seeing what's next. That's the only reason I would not want to die now is because I want to know what's next. I literally, just a couple of weeks ago, I jumped out of an airplane. I went skydiving. And it was fantastic. And I'll tell you the best part of it, aside from the initial free fall. Well, there's a couple parts. When you have to ride up to get to 10,000 feet, I thought I was going to be like, oh God, this is scary. I was so calm. And I felt such peace. And I realized it's because I knew that if I bounced that day, I'd be good. I've done so much in my life, thanks to people like you and other, Steve O'Rourke, who blessed me by hiring me. Well, he and David, of course, but he said to me after my 2-week probation period where they made sure I could actually handle the gig, he said, Durga, we've got all the money in the world. We can hire whomever we like. And we chose you. And that changed my voice even. My voice got bigger out of that vote of confidence. So I've done amazing things. So if I had died that day, I would have been fine. That was great. Then when you get to 10,000 feet and you've got a guy strapped to your back, he flips the door open and I, in the front, had to swing my legs out of the plane so that my legs were hanging out over nothing. And it was like, okay, we're doing this. And then he pushed us out of the plane. Those were the two best parts. My life is pretty damn good right now. I don't want to say yet something that is in the works in case I'm waiting for some funding for something huge. And that's what I mean when I say I want to see what comes next. If I pull this off, you'll know about it.
One thing, life is full of everything. Life is full of high points. It's full of low points. It's full of challenges. And it's also full of tragedy as well. And you've had your share.
Yes.
I know this is going to be really difficult, but I really wanted to talk to you about it because you had the great love of your life, I presume. And
so far.
he, sadly, he passed away. He died.
Yeah. Yes.
How did you ever get over that? That's really something I really feel like I need to know, because must be such a difficult thing.
It is. It has been. Although, even though he was the great love of my life to date, he was a very damaged individual. He had a lot of issues. So it was incredibly tumultuous. I know that I've been loved in a way that a lot of people will never experience. I mean, the man literally tattooed my name across his heart. But what came with it was a great deal of turmoil. And I'm ready now for the next love of my life, who is going to bring me a lot of peace. Getting over that was hard, but death is part of life. It's part of the balance. And I'm happy to say that at this point, I mean, there's some things I'll never be over, but I took from it some incredible jewels. Like, Youth and I have actually recorded another Blue Pearl album. We're just trying to get it released. And there's a song on there that I wrote in the aftermath of, I started touring again, and we were living in this building that I live in now, but in the apartment directly below here. And I came home from the airport and came around the corner, and he'd lined the walkway with roses and candles, and there was a champagne bucket. And because our anniversary was like 2 days later. And so it was a welcome home / anniversary thing. And we spent 3 full days in bed making love. And, we'd kind of fall asleep and then wake up and make love and, eat a little bit and laugh and make love and fall asleep. And this whole thing we had really good blackout curtains, so you couldn't tell what time of day or night it was. And it just turned into this swirl of time outside of time. And I wanted to capture that in a song. And I did. And having him in my life gave me that. As well as when I was just talking about playing Blanche Dubois, I now have this extra whole range of colors in my artistic palette that I didn't have before he died. I have immediate access to a level of pain that I didn't have, which is actually, it sounds horrible, but it's an amazing gift as an artist to have access to that, because when I express it, it's not only very cathartic for me, but it's cathartic for the audience as well. And that's partially why I let myself go there. Now when I sing, I had to fly out 3 days after he died to do some shows in Italy. And that first show was really hard because I started to cry like in the first song a little bit. But I've learned how to use that and just bring depth to what I'm singing. And it inspires an automatic response in the audience of the same release. So it's a real privilege to be an instrument of release for people in that way. And that's where I'm at now in my career. That's what interests me. It's not just being cute and singing and sounding good. I want to be an instrument of emotional release and engagement for people.
Well, as I said in the beginning, I mean, you're a beautiful person. I love the fact that you're so open and honest, and also that you're at a point of your life where you're really looking forward to the next part of your life, which I think is such an important thing of people. I'm going to say our age. I'm 3 years older. So I think, or 4 years older, I'm lying. And what I look forward to, of course, is that we do get together again one day. Maybe then it's in Greece and we have some fun and we relive our youth.
I would love that. I would love that, because there's just, next to Italian men, Greek men are my favorite. And while I'm still single, I want to get that in, because I don't think I'm going to stay single for too much longer.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.